It's easier, someone once said, to imagine the end of the world than it is the end of capitalism.
But it's clear that where we can make systems of this complexity, cultural systems, economic systems, machines of this complexity, surely we could make a world that could first meet those needs I described that everyone should have, and then perhaps meet needs that people have only dreamed of, like the need for some autonomy and freedom. The need for that little space up there, the I part, to expand a little bit. Just a little. Just a little. Just a little.
The socialism that could engage with the yearnings and dreamings
in Miles Davis music.
An aesthetic dimension.
Radically incompatible with everyday life under capitalism.
Okay, hey, hi guys, I'm Mike again from the Acid Left. I'm here with my regular co-host Adam Ray Adkins, and we have today with us Marshall Roderick, who wants to be known effectively as, it's a big thing, but as the son of Rick Roderick. Okay, so Rick Roderick was a philosopher and a great popularizer of philosophy and critical theory who passed away, sadly, in 2002 in his early 50s. But he had a number of video series on philosophy issues. And he basically brought philosophy to a greater mass of people than had experienced philosophy before through these great lecture series by the Teaching Company videos, which have been uploaded in recent years to YouTube on multiple channels, and it's kind of given him a second wind, so to speak. He's become hugely popular again, and possibly more popular than before even. He's kind of a grandfather figure to the online left, and particularly Lefttube, in the way that he dealt with left philosophical issues through his videos, and then kind of re-emerged on YouTube when this was kind of happening in other circles, but kind of gave this background to people. So it feels like there's this kind of precursor to what we're doing now. So basically, we did a change.org petition as a means of trying to get his book on Habermas republished by Springer. And in doing that, we got put on to Max Roderick, who actually wrote a brilliant kind of partial life story of Rick Roderick on rickroderick.org. And basically the thing is that to get the book republished, Springer said we had to get in touch with his estate, which is his family. And we found that Max, with Marshall, who's here today, is already trying to publish some of Rick's work, but it's complicated. And now that kind of pushed Max to then try and recontact Springer, and all this stuff is going on, but we're not quite sure where it is now. But we want to kind of talk to Marshall about where that process is a little bit later. Before that, just to talk about Rick Roderick himself as a person, as a kind of popularizer of philosophy, as a teacher.
Yeah, I think, Mike, that you hit the nail on the head, that Rick Roderick's lecture series that were later uploaded to YouTube really did influence a lot of the direction of the whole Lefttube or breadtube movement. And to me, that's really interesting, because I don't know if he even knew the impact that these videotapes would have. So I guess that's my first question is, when he was approached by the Learning Company to do these tapes, was he excited about it? Did he find this prospect of, home VHSs and home cassettes where someone talks about philosophy interesting and exciting, or was he just doing it to do it?
No, okay. So one thing I don't think people really know about Rick is he was super into technology. We had like an Apple II at some point. We had 2 VCRs. Like we were into stealing stuff way before other people. So, we'd rent movies and we'd keep them. We had a big library of VHS tapes and stuff like that. As far as when he went to record the lectures, he was very excited about it. But back then, it was a very nascent company. No one knew like where this thing was going to go or what they were really going to do with it, or at least that was my impression at the time. But Rick's main thing was getting stuff out there. I mean, in a weird way, he kind of prefigured this kind of stuff. His humor was somewhat Chapo-esque. I'm not saying he would agree with everything Chapo says or whatever, and I don't even know what they think. And now that we're all online, like you can't just I don't know, like everything someone said, if you agree with them, all of a sudden you have to agree with all those things. So I don't want to like overcommit there. But he had the same sensibilities, and I feel like if he were alive today, he would definitely be podcasting. He'd be out there. He wanted to get this stuff out there. One of the main things he wanted to do was take Kierkegaard, take these books that like are sort of incomprehensible. And definitely to me, let me just, and stop me if I'm talking too much, because I do love to talk. Rick had about 50 to 60. Oh, I'm sorry. What's up?
No, I was saying great. No, carry on. It's good.
Yeah, I mean, my dad, he had about 60 IQ points on me. So I'm going to do the best I can. But I'm not going to be able to give you the unfiltered, like, this is what Rick would think. God, I wish he were alive, because I would love to pick his brain about stuff, even for a day, right? And for other reasons too, obviously. But no, he loved getting the message out there. I don't think he knew, but I will say this. He wasn't like one of these people who never saw fame in his lifetime or something like that. We got a lot of letters from prisoners, especially, because I think they could use these teaching company tapes to get like credits or something like that. And I thought that was super cool, just because it's not your typical audience for stuff like this. He would get letters from like famous people and stuff like that. I'm very paranoid about all that kind of stuff, so I'm not going to name any names. And so he generally kind of knew things. He would get his stuff out there. But I don't think he could have foreseen where we're at today. It's so disappointing, because I think he really would have thrived in this environment.
He would have. And something that does strike me, you kind of got at this, is his ability to mix highbrow, dense philosophy with pop cultural moments, which is very commonplace now, both in academia with philosophers like Mark Fisher, Slavoj Žižek, but also especially on the internet. A lot of the philosophy videos are using pop cultural elements. But when he talks about Blade Runner and Baudrillard, that's not something you really saw at that time. So it's really neat how he was able to capture that, and it's what I think makes it so appealing to so many people. And it's really good to hear that there were prisoners, that were able to watch those videos, and that it made a good impact on their life. I don't know, it's pretty heartwarming.
Yeah, I mean,
I want to touch on something. Firstly, you mentioned of Chapo, Trap House, I guess, the podcast. I mean, I'm not sure how much he would have been. He would align with them, but I guess, I'm not sure, partly because I don't listen to them that much. I guess, yeah, to some degree, politically maybe, but more in the irreverence, I think, for sure. Right. Yeah, I can definitely see the irreverence towards hierarchy, towards political establishment, and towards academia. So I'm definitely with you in that respect. Another thing is just how much Baudrillard seemed to go through his work and the kind of simulacrum. He actually ended, I think, his videos with Baudrillard, if I'm right. But it seemed to be always there, this kind of thing that we're living in a kind of false media society, spectacle. I mean, what would he make of today? Because surely we're living in even more of a spectacle. So, with regard to just how we live today in our kind of mediatic reality, but also the kind of online left, do you know what he would make of this?
I mean, as far as that goes, I don't know. Fisher especially is important in this, because I do feel like we're just down this inescapable rabbit hole of just, kind of post-capitalist narcissism and all this kind of stuff. I don't know what he would have thought about that. I do feel like, though, in a hopeful sense, just the fact that anyone can start a friggin' TV network and make better content than like Colbert or whatever the hell is out there on TV. And there's no breaks to like sell pharmaceuticals or whatever. I think he would have loved that, but I think he would have seen this time as pretty sort of narcissistic and detached, alienated, there's just a ton of alienation, and like people just seem kind of trapped in these ideological bubbles and stuff like that. But this is one of those things, right, where I would just kill to hear his actual take on it, because he definitely has some angles on it that I don't have. But I got to say this too about Rick, and it's hard to put this correctly, I think. He kind of liked, he didn't mind that the world was crazy, right? So like if you went back to Roman times, you'd kind of miss out if you didn't go to the vomitorium or go to the Colosseum. You know what I mean? Like you live in those times. So like do the wacky bullshit that they're doing. So he kind of liked, he wasn't the type of person to let this stuff sort of cloud his actual life. And he kind of enjoyed breaking it down. And he never like lost hope, right? So he never lost hope that people could actually become free on some level. So I just can't sit here and say it would have been all depressing. I get super friggin' depressed, like about all of this kind of thing.
Well, I think that's important. Yeah, I mean, I think, and then I think we're with you there. We're all kind of, we all get depressed here, and have been depressed and anxious and what have you, and it's partly the capitalism doing it. Although I think this is a big debate because I think there's always other aspects, and I think if we're too much like, it's all capitalism, then we don't kind of seek help in other ways. There are just basic chemical maybe imbalances and other issues around health. So I mean, it's a big area where we've been talking a little bit about lately. But I mean, I think one thing is that Roderick was a kind of pioneer, and he stood out for the way in which he challenged academia. I wonder where that ground would be today, because basically everyone's just doing this thing of making videos, or many people. I mean, there's still this whole academic world that doesn't touch that and is very snobbish about it, weirdly, even today, because I think there was some snobbery towards him then, and maybe you can kind of tell me more about that in a bit. But I wonder, where he would stand now, what he would do. Would he be another YouTuber that was just a bit better than most of them, or nearly all of them, or would he do something else entirely?
I think he would do something along those lines, and I'll tell you why. I've never in my life met anyone or seen anyone who cared less about sort of the office politics or being professional or whatever side of life. So like he was actively involved in student organizations, protests, unions, and openly protesting, showing up at the president of the university's office. And this is all pre-tenure. Like, I mean, this is obviously why, he didn't get tenure, in my opinion. He was utterly unconcerned about any of that. And he didn't care, after the tenure track, I go somewhere else and I kick up dust there too, I mean, in fact, every job he ever had, he tried to start a union pretty much. He just did not care about that stuff. He really was a very free guy. And I've got to say, going back to what we were talking about before, he would have been such a good voice for not letting this shit get to you. I don't know how he did it. I wish I knew the secret to that. But yeah. No, I think he would have been another YouTuber or some kind of streamer or something like that, or maybe releasing videos. Although he was so much better off the cuff. That's one thing I really feel bad about for everyone. He was so good off the cuff. His classes, I've seen standing ovations in his classes. And it's just it's rough because like the teaching company stuff is good. And the second series is called Self Under Siege, and I think I like that one even better. But it's still him in a studio. It's still him, it's not the live sort of vibe that you get, or even around the house. Like that's the thing, is he was spontaneous, funny, sort of a crazy guy around the house, a very positive person. And not just losing him, losing him was rough, but losing that sort of just always fight sort of vibe, like fight to be free every day.
I think there was a distinction there actually between him and Fisher, because I think there's a strong existentialist aspect, because a lot of his talks were about existentialist type figures, Sartre, Kierkegaard. So there is this kind of like, we're all doomed, but then there's this kind of we have to make a meaning anyway. And it's actually something that's mentioned in Max Roderick's kind of essay about him on rickroderick.org, that he pieced together a meaning to an existence which otherwise, could have been meaningless because he had kind of traumas. So, I think there is this other aspect, because of course this is crucial. I think that there's always some kind of corner of reality that we stake out as the area from which we can create freedom of ideas, of movement. And that's always still there. And I think some people now, they're so black-pilled, to use a term which actually is almost like on the watch list now in the UK, because it's been used by a guy who then shot up some people. So whoops, but they're black-pilled. People have become so nihilist. There isn't this anymore, this aspect of, hey, but we can fucking do something anyway. That seems to be lost in the online debate. So I think it's very important to say that. What you just said, it just made me think actually where Roderick maybe has kind of a different, how would you call it, theoretical perspective to some of the people we're dealing with most of the time today. Yeah,
it would have been interesting to see how that came out today, because there is this sort of, Breadtube actually aligns with them very closely, I think, with these things, like that sort of genre or whatever. And I hate to even venture into this area because there's so much bullshit around it, but the sort of woke social mores, you have to follow our strict, like, prescribed social code or whatever stuff. I think you would have found that somewhat abhorrent, because it's regardless of like what the intended purpose or where he aligned on those issues, it's the fact of imposing these behavioral norms in such a strict fashion. I mean, that's one reason he became a leftist in the first place, because he grew up in a strict sort of Southern Baptist, if someone's divorced, like, they're basically shunned kind of thing. So any kind of strong system of social codes he was going to push against. And I wonder how that would have played out. And also, like, just to go back to the Chapo thing, I mean, his sense of humor could be pretty crude. His sense of humor could be pretty rough sometimes, if he was allowed to just talk, right? I don't think it would have been like problematic or whatever, but it certainly would be more working class, Yeah, I mean, it could be problematic, just because anyone can be problematic accidentally if you just let yourself say anything and joke around, I guess. So you're right there. I mean, one thing I will say, I have to backtrack a bit, because I don't think Fisher wasn't saying that we need to kind of carve out a space. We need to kind of leverage that small area where it feels like we can be free and use that somehow. I think he kind of was saying that, but I think that's very much lost. And I don't think they just have different vibes. So I see Roderick as kind of, I mean, for you, it's going to sound bizarre. I mean, kind of paternal. It's kind of feeling, for you, of course, there is a paternal vibe, but there is this kind of feeling where he can be saying like, hey, come on, guys and girls, we can do it. We can make some meaning. And you don't get that off many people speaking now, and Fisher certainly wasn't really doing that, but I'm not saying he should have been doing that. I just think there's obviously different personas and also maybe times.
And it's clear, I mean, we're saying that, sometimes he made jokes and stuff that could be rough, but it's also clear that he had a deep sympathy for all oppressed people. He makes points throughout these videos about American race relations, about gender relations that are pretty radical for the time period, that you wouldn't expect to hear something like that. I wanted to ask a little bit about, you mentioned that he had tried to start unions at all these jobs. He spoke truth to the power of the institutions he was a part of. Even in those video series, there's several times where you can tell he's making kind of a critique of the institution he's in, or had just left, which is, very nice to see. And I think he's been taken up a lot by Marxist figures, maybe like Western Marxist or post-Marxist type figures. And I'm curious, though, if he actually had a defined political ideology. It's clear that he was left-leaning, and he mentions Marx. He wrote a book about the Frankfurt School figure Habermas. He said he was a student of Marcuse, but he also says, he's careful to say, and I don't agree with everything Marx said by any means. So did he have that defined ideology, or was he more just pursuing kind of this existential left freedom?
Yeah, well, that's interesting. He did call himself a Marxist for most of my life. I feel like as he got older, he got more esoteric and like beyond my sort of comprehension of where he was exactly at. Um, but I do think, I mean, one thing, yeah, I just have to come back to is just this idea of like, get free from this stuff somehow. But yeah, no, he called himself a Marxist for most of his life, and I think his sympathies were still with Marx at the end. But he probably had some like crazy twist on it or whatever.
Yeah, a good Marxist shouldn't be dogmatic, probably. So that's
yeah,
good.
yes, he constitutionally couldn't be, right. Like he just never was gonna be a right down the middle, like whatever. You know what I mean?
Yeah, for sure. Yeah. I'm just thinking in that regard that, I mean, you at some point in the email conversation we had prior to what we're doing now, you said you can try and talk, kind of extrapolate from your father's general character, and you can try and kind of work out what he might say about today. Going from the kind of things he said about that period, 90s to very early 2000s, what would he make of Trump and Biden?
Yeah, this would be the biggest. This would be the biggest thing I would want to hear from him. I mean, I can't imagine his take would be very much different about Biden than he's just this sort of forward-facing sort of image of just this technocratic sort of oligarchical sort of system. And they were so desperate to find anyone that they could certainly trust, like completely, that they just dug up this friggin' corpse. I don't think there is another take, but knowing my dad, he would have found something. Trump that's the tricky one, because he wouldn't have fallen for the dialogue of like, ooh, Trump's turning everything a certain way, right? Like the media was so expert in that, of making it seem like Trump is the reason we have this sort of fascist border policy and stuff like that. And meanwhile, that's been going on forever, or that kind of stuff. So I don't think he would have been hysterical about Trump. Obviously, wouldn't have liked. I mean, come on, dude. I mean, we hated Trump my whole life, but I think one of the things he would have said is that the media made Trump. They pushed Trump for a million years. I mean, they espoused his values. They created him completely, like for our whole lives. And my dad always had distaste for that. Of course, I don't even think I have to say, just Trump's value system and sort of image and all this. But it was kind of ironic how, like, they've pushed this guy for decades, and all of a sudden they have a problem with him because he wants to be, a middle manager that they don't want. But it would have been hilarious, dude. Like that kills me just to imagine what he would have had to say about that. But I do think, like Michael Moore, I don't know if y'all remember this Michael Moore quote about a lot of people were just pressing that button for Trump because they knew it would piss off some of the people that should be pissed off. A lot of these sort of ruling class, sort of types, right? And I think he would have got a little bit of a giggle out of that, just to be completely honest. And it would have been like a chickens coming home to roost for America kind of thing. But of course he wouldn't have liked him. And of course, the fucking robber baron tax code and all that kind of stuff. So I hesitate to like go too far down that road, but he would have had fun with it. And there would have been so much good, like, I don't know, just hilarious discourse. But I do feel like he would have created a space for people to sort of mock Trump in a way and not get so sort of caught up in that. And then of course how Trump fizzled out was hilarious, but
I think you hit it with the giggle there. It's like, because he does have this way of kind of giggling at the barbarity of, the system without ceding to that barbarity. And yeah, because it's the way that the mainstream liberal media dismissed Trump while trying to save that very system that brought him up. So saying Trump's bad, yet capitalism and American democracy is still doing good, even though this is exactly where it leads to. They still want to push that entrepreneurial spirit, this idea of the strong businessman, yet
Yeah.
Just not him.
Yeah.
So you would you'd have to critique both of them in order for it to be a worthy critique.
I think that's a perfect way to put it. That bind that they put themselves in, which is sort of where America's at right now, right? Is like they put themselves behind this 8-ball, and now they're having to print money and give it out to hedge funds and like keep the economy going in this fake fucking way. And their media has utterly lost all credibility. I think the average person probably doesn't even believe in democracy anymore. And again, the hopeful part of this is I do feel like, when we're extremely online, we get like a weird warped view of this stuff. I talked about the woke stuff before. Who knows how much that really even exists, right? The people I talk to are actually pretty savvy about democracy, about capitalism, about oligarchy, and I don't care if they're a fucking, waiter or whatever, and I'm not talking shit about waiters. I couldn't even be a waiter because I can't hold those things in my mind, but I fuck up people's orders constantly and who knows. So I'm not talking shit about waiters, but I'm just saying like people, I feel like at least the people I talk to kind of have a general idea of how things are fucked. Right. And we just don't see that because a lot of those people aren't extremely online people, but no one can tolerate watching TV anymore. Right. Like it's crazy. The amount of people I run into, they're just like, yeah, I don't watch TV because it's fucking awful. So that stuff is all very hopeful to me. I don't remember there. I think there was more to your question, but
okay, but we can just keep rolling. Probably. Yeah. I mean, this is how we roll anyway. we don't always cover every angle that we pick up. We don't always remember. We're the acid left. So that's
well, you guys are really having to pull teeth, Yeah.
No, but this is good. Bob Ross has become very popular again. I mean, he was always popular. It kind of sounds silly to say that. I guess in Europe he's become much more known than he was before. But Bob Ross was anyway huge in the US, and he's just had his own Netflix series, a program documentary about Bob Ross. But his kind of rise on Twitch is kind of it was happening at the same time as Rick Roderick's rise on YouTube. Maybe. Actually, Bob Ross's kind of rise on Twitch when they put all of his stuff back on streaming on Twitch was a bit later. It was a bit more recent, and Roderick was a few years ago that he first started blowing up on YouTube. But I mean, somehow I see some kind of link there in a way. But of course, Rick Roderick is so much more serious and he has these more weighty issues. And Bob Ross is kind of ridiculous in some ways, but seems a nice guy. But then somehow is embroiled in this thing of just trying to sell paint. But this documentary puts it actually he was a nice guy and he got basically screwed over by other people trying to sell paint, and actually has his son in it, and his son's kind of upset because the rights to Bob Ross's name actually can't be claimed by his family. They can't do anything with his name, so that's kind of terrible. I want to deal without going into that because we're going to get into whether you can publish your dad's book again. Which is a completely different scenario. I'm not saying it's comparable to the Bob Ross kind of scandal there in that documentary. But, I mean, what would your dad have made about this kind of comparison? Because I'm sure I'm not the first person to kind of see that comparison between the popularizer of art, Bob Ross, and the popularizer of philosophy, Rick Roderick. Is that something that's ever occurred to you?
Yeah, well, absolutely not. But I see it now. Actually, when I read the question, it made me think about it. There's a couple things here, okay, and I'm going to put my opinion here real quick first. I think you mentioned before paternalistic figures, right? And just real quick, as just a biographical note about my dad, we had so many people that treated Rick as a dad. We had people begging to like move into our house. My parents suck. Please, I'll do chores. I'll pay the rent. So he always had that paternalistic vibe, and I will always feel spoiled, right? Because pearls before swine and all that, and I never appreciated it. Just was the facts of my life or whatever. So the Bob Ross thing. So this is interesting. I do think paternalistic figures are incredibly popular. I think that was the entire reason for the Jordan Peterson thing. I think people get that stuff wrong. They get all caught up in the politics, ideology, blah, blah, blah. But the reason he was so popular is because he was internet dad for a lot of people that had shitty dads or didn't have dads or whatever. So I feel like that's part of it. But I don't want to, that's not the focus of my answer here. But I think that is part of it. Another part of it is in this narcissistic kind of mean, bubbly world where you spend half the time online just launching volleys at people you don't like or snarkily replying to people's tweets or whatever it is. There's something about just nice fucking people, right? So there's the Bob Ross thing, and there was also the movie about Mr. Rogers, right? He's just a nice fucking guy. And so there's something about that too, because it's so rare today. And actually, just as a side note, you know, I try to occasionally watch some TV show that people talk about or whatever. And as I start watching, I realize every character on it is a fucking scumbag, or they're just not nice. They're just like, and they're not relatable. But anyway, that's on the side. So I will say this though. My dad didn't really like boring people, right? And I used to watch Bob Ross when I was a kid, and it used to drive him crazy because it bored the hell out of him. See, my dad liked watching Jimmy Swaggart or televangelists and stuff. He loved watching rhetoric. He loved watching people. He loved the movie Elmer Gantry, which I highly recommend. He loved that aspect, that performance aspect, because that's a huge part of demystifying things. That's a huge part of getting stuff out there, whether we like it or not, is to kind of sell the thing. So selling Marxism, as weird as that sounds. So I don't know if you would have found it amusing, right? Because like I see the comparison and I find it amusing, but whether he would have, I don't know, man. Like he just had a thing. He was not a big fan of Mr. Rogers either. He just did not like boring people. So yeah, I just got to be honest on that.
Mr. Rogers is probably lost on anyone not American, because I don't know what that means.
Oh, well, okay, I'll try to explain it, but it's a little surreal. So he does like a children's show, and he's incredibly like mild-mannered. He talks very deliberately, very slow. He sings these little songs and stuff. It's a really bizarre show. I highly recommend it just because the aesthetics and stuff are so weird. And he like plays with things on the show. So he's doing the voices of the puppets right there on the show. And I want to say it was like a public TV thing. So it didn't have this huge like sort of profit motive thing behind it. So it came off really weird. I highly recommend just watching one episode just because it's a very unique thing. And I hear the movie was good. I don't know.
Okay. I will look it up. We have quite a lot of American listeners, so that won't be lost on most of the audience. And now the rest of the audience will now know what that means. So that's good.
There's something there that really strikes me, and it's that Mr. Rogers, Bob Ross, and Rick Roderick all have very distinctive voices as well. And that's not something I actually really thought about in comparison-wise, but it is something whenever I'm trying to show someone a Roderick video, I describe quickly him to them, and I'll say, oh, you'll love it. It's this guy, he has the thickest West Texan accent, and he's talking about Nietzsche and Marx. Like, you should go check it out. And that always gives something to it. I don't know. It's kind of a humanizing feature of him because especially at that time, that's not the accent you would associate with someone talking about these types of ideas. And as silly as it sounds, I really do think the voice itself has a great weight in how something is communicated. And you know, you said he watched a lot of televangelists and stuff, and that's actually kind of telling because you can see that in his lectures, at least the recorded ones. You know, he gives a lot of dramatic pauses, and the way that he'll look back at the audience or camera, I can see a little bit of that televangelist influence there.
That had occurred to me. That had occurred to me actually at various points, that there is a kind of a feeling of a pastor, or however you would call it. Okay, evangelists will do as well. I can't think of all the names, but okay, priests. It's more of the capitalist selling something, that they have this kind of cheesy celebrity. The ones that do really well have this kind of cheesy celebrity kind of vibe about them. And in a way, I can see it's a similar thing, because in kind of copying the TV evangelist, he's not just copying a Christian, he's copying a capitalist. It's someone selling something.
Oh yeah,
which isn't a bad thing, because this is maybe one of the ways to proceed. He did talk about situationism, De Boer, and this kind of using the tools of the media against people. This process of détournement. So I kind of now am putting everything together and seeing that maybe partly this was a strategy, that he talked a bit like a persona from the media in order to use the media to get across basically anti-media ideas or anti-capitalist media ideas.
Yeah, exactly. I think I'm trying to formulate this properly in my head. I think there's something about, and I'm not going to name names, but some of the popular like streamers or e-celebs or whatever, there's this sort of weird transactional sort of like this e-celeb thing of like they just picked this niche because it was a niche or something like that. For Rick, and this goes back to the Marxism thing too. Rick was never, and you mentioned this too, he was never like fully a materialist, right? I mean, there was a sort of quote unquote spiritual side to this. There's a spirit to it. And I just feel like it grounds it so much more. So if he were doing something like this today, he'd have all these rhetorical tools and all that he just kind of, in my life at least, always had. But it would also feel real and like grounded. Like there's something about a lot of these people where it's like, well, this is just their gimmick. They're good at talking about politics. And I'm not thinking bread tubers here. Honestly, I think a lot of bread tubers would just do with getting better with their sort of rhetoric and presentation, stuff like that. I don't know, not that I'm the fucking expert, but yeah, there's something about like, it's coming from the heart with him. It's not, he would have done this shit if he would have been Diogenes if that's what it had to be. And that's even with 4 kids. Like, I don't know how someone does that. I'm such a coward in comparison. I worked this crappy office job. I had a week from hell, 8 hours of just brutality every day, not a moment to think. Like, I didn't get to really think about these questions until this morning. But my dad was just not like that. Like, these things were never going to bother him. So,
well, actually, yeah, I mean, the thing of being a Lefttube or a podcaster is kind of a lot of the time a bit the opposite. Is rather than making oneself really expansive in their gestures and going out and greeting people, you're kind of huddled often in the corner of your house and trying to avoid going out and speaking to the people, which is something I talk about a bit. Me and Adam have spoken about a bit. It's like, how do people get more out talking to the people? But of course, it's often not the podcasters who are going to end up doing that. So saying the podcasters ought to get up and go and talk to the people is useless because they're introverts and they don't want to. They're kind of scared. So that is a distinction. I think you're right with the rhetoric and the body language. I suppose it being a medium where the camera's up close to the face maybe doesn't lend itself so much to that. Yeah. But yeah, certainly I'm not seeing anyone who inspires me and makes me feel a sense of confidence. All I'm seeing is like a few people I've met through this medium, like Adam, Matt McManus, One Dime, Ernesto Vargas. There's like maybe 8-10 of them now that we kind of feel some fraternity with, which I didn't have so much before. And so that's great, but that's a slightly different thing. I'm not feeling like the confidence in someone who I think, oh yeah, now I feel I can go out there and kind of leverage some freedom more than I felt before.
Yeah, I mean, part of it too, his favorite character from the Tolkien books was Tom Bombadil, and I feel like that was his vibe. He could sit there and just throw the ring around and not give a shit. I mean, I guess that was his power too. Is like he just wasn't going to enter into a lot of these transactional sort of relationships in order to be more comfortable or make more money or something like that. He just wasn't going to do that. Yeah. So I think that's really important too.
That's fair enough. I mean, I have to backtrack a bit because it's not like I don't get that vibe of like strategies to carry on when I'm like interacting with this group of equals, Adam and Ernesto and people. I do get that. It's just I'm not seeing the person you occasionally meet in your life, a few of them, who sort of says, you think, oh, they've got that bit more strength, and then you feel like you can go and follow in their footsteps. Yeah. Those people don't really exist today in the same way, I'm finding.
There's no, okay, so this is something I've thought about, and this would be something I would be talking to my dad about. There seems to be no leaders at all. And I mean, even in the ruling class, they're all middle management. They're all figureheads. They're all sort of somewhat clueless, it seems. There are no leaders. There aren't even like Jesse Jacksons. There's nothing like that. There's no Malcolm X for damn sure. But yeah, there's no leaders at all. And I don't know if there's like chemicals in the water. Like, I don't know why that is, right? It just seems insane that there are no real, and I don't mean, people that do media or something like that, but just like actual leaders, you know.
Yeah, but I think there's no Madonna either. Even Madonna isn't Madonna anymore in a way.
Yeah.
So I mean, there's just no star at that level, even in the field of celebrity.
Yeah.
Just doesn't seem, because this situation where anyone can then become a star, even accidentally or mostly accidentally, in fact. Somebody going, "Hey, I'm a star," doesn't really work. People sort of say, calm down.
Yeah.
It's not really the done thing.
Yeah, and I think that's it, Mike. I mean, I think that a lot of that has to do with the actual way that media is made and distributed nowadays. It is more nebulous, so it has an upside and a downside. So those big stars are less likely to come because we're able to access so much more. When there's only a couple channels, a couple movies, being made or whatever, it was very easy to find stars and leaders and whatnot. But as the material relations develop and things change, and now, yeah, we're not getting that. And even if they do pop up, it's very short lived.
Yeah.
I do want to ask. I want to ask a little bit about your dad's life.
Yeah.
He said several times that he was like the son of a con man and a beautician, I believe. And then you mentioned that he grew up in this very strict Southern Baptist type of lifestyle, which I'm familiar with. I grew up around, not in. But how does that man, a son of a con man and a beautician, growing up in a strict fundamentalist area, turn into a Marxist philosopher that likes to use media comparisons?
Yeah, so this kind of is mind-blowing to me too. But yeah, that description's perfect. That was better than I was going to go with, so I'm really glad you got that. But it's totally true. And his mom just absolutely ruled, by the way, my grandma. I mean, his dad was interesting too, but by the time I knew him, he was a pretty old, angry man. But whatever, who cares? But yeah, so my dad grew up in Tuscola, Texas. It was a town of like maybe 500 at the time, and it's less now. Yeah, incredibly small, 20 miles or so south of Abilene. And his graduating class was like 7 people, which I think in a way is an advantage because you grow up feeling like you matter, right? So let me try to solve this. This is actually something I've thought about my whole life. And don't totally understand it. I know, like, his mom was incredibly smart and had no opportunities, and incredibly witty, as Rick was, and could be very cutting, but in like a funny kind of Southern way, not in a waspy sort of I want to punch this lady way. So, and they always saw through this sort of environment they lived in, right? So it's not like they were Baptist or anything like that. So I think what happened was, aside from him just being some kind of outlier, like my brother Max is too. Max is a genius, and like his writing is amazing to me. But anyway, that's a side note. Like, definitely check out more Max's work. He did stuff with Dagger Mag, and I don't know, there's stuff out there he doesn't promote, so it's out there. But anyway, so let me try to put this together. So he was incredibly smart. He just loved analyzing, well, everything really, but mainly social relations and stuff like that. His mom encouraged him. I mean, he was an only child, right? So he got a lot of attention in that way. And his mom, now very, very poor, by the way. But his mom got him interested in debate because I guess she saw this this thing early on with him. And he really thrived at that, doing these sort of debate things, among these different schools and stuff like that. And then look, in this day and age, I don't know how this is going to come across. This was pretty friggin' standard at the time. He found that quoting Nietzsche and stuff like that got him laid. Like, I'm sorry, but that's part of it. It was so unusual out there. But he also, again, this striving for freedom or whatever, like, he wanted out of that fucking town from day one, and coming to Austin, like, was the thing he wanted to do his whole life. And so I think when you combine those things together with just the 60s, he was a huge fan of Dylan and all that kind of stuff. I can't place all these years because I didn't live through it, so I'm not sure the order. But I think that's how it happened. Is he was just a really big fish in a small pond, and his mom encouraged him down certain paths that he already had talent at. And yeah, I think that's, well, and let's be really honest, the Vietnam War. If he's not at school, and he would admit this. Well, he said the only reason he got his PhD was because of the Vietnam War. Again, because like his like dislike of academia extends that far. He probably wouldn't have stuck around. Lord knows what he would have done. He probably would have been a televangelist. I don't know, but like,
so it was in order to avoid the draft. He kept in school.
He kept going. And when he was in school, look, it was just like when he was working. He had professors, and he would teach the anti-class after their class. He would go up at the end of class and go, "Hey, I'm going to start a class right now, arguing against everything we just heard." And then people would stick around and he would just sit there for another, 30 minutes or so, just talking shit. But I don't know, dude. Fuck. I miss that motherfucker, man.
And he was born in 1949, so that means he was 20 in 1969 at the ripe age where a lot of this stuff, a lot of counterculture and anti-war movements were very strong. And obviously, I guess that means when he was 19, he saw the assassination of several prominent left-wing figures. So I'm sure that played a strong role in it.
Oh yeah, he was. Yeah, that sort of weighed on him even when I was a kid. I remember, him talking about, and of course, we got into all the conspiracy stuff and all that stuff around it. He was a big fan of Malcolm X, obviously a fan of Bobby Kennedy and stuff like that. Yeah, he was still sad about that by the time I was a kid or whatever, and he would talk about that frequently. That was one of the great things about having him as a dad. He'd talk about Castro, he'd talk about these figures. He'd introduce us to books we could read and all this kind of stuff. So, but yeah, no, he went through all of that. And I think like, especially philosophy early on, especially Nietzsche, because Nietzsche, you can read at 13 and kind of get it, was like this way to like get out of the vibe that he's just sort of felt, growing up in Tuscola. One other thing I'll mention, because this is another thing I think people don't know, there's not a lot to do out there. And there was a gas station that had a pool table. And so he grew up playing a lot of pool, was amazingly good at it, playing a lot of chess, playing a lot of poker, and was good at all of them. And that's something I think people don't know, is he was actually competitive in a sort of weird way. And I want to put this out there because like people that just want to know more about him, The Hustler, that original movie, the Paul Newman character, I mean, he really identified with that, just that feeling of excelling at something. He used to play a lot of internet chess, and I swear I only saw him lose like 2 times. And his rating was something absurd, well past the 2000s or whatever. But I don't know how that all works. Like, I suck at chess. That's the thing. I didn't inherit any of this stuff, right? It kind of sucks. But so that's just an aspect of him I want to put out there because I feel like it's sort of an important part of who he was too.
Yeah, you mentioned Max Roderick. Actually, I'm going to say again, there's a brilliant text about your dad on rickroderick.org. So I'm going to put a link below this video when it's up, video podcast, however we end up loading it. So yeah, it's just a very touching account of just a lot of difficult things your father had to put up with. I don't know that we'll go into them unless you think it's important that we do, but I just say to people, read it, because it just, to me, it just made me see Rick Roderick's work in a whole new light, and then more understand this existentialist aspect and why that keeps coming in when he's giving his lectures, because he's saying that this is how you deal with a difficult life, and he'd had one. So I actually found you through Max, and I found Max because Springer Link said that if we wanted to get his book republished called Habermas and the Foundations of Critical Theory, his only, I believe, complete standalone book, that we would have to speak to the estate, I guess your family. I don't know who's controlling the estate exactly. Yeah. And then somehow, because someone heard me speaking on Nightmare Masterclass, a podcast, and about this, it was a whole edition on Rick Roderick. And someone told, I think, Max about this. And so somehow we ended up in contact. And then he basically said that he'd wanted to speak to Springer, but also to these people who made the videos. You can tell me in a minute the name of this company, because there was this idea also of publishing all of the text, all the transcripts to the videos as a book. So maybe two different things going on, or maybe one long book with lots of different texts. I'm not quite sure. So we were just happy that this kind of got rolling again, and that I think you've been speaking to Springer Link again. So where is that? Because the whole point of this was that, look, I mean, he's not in the canon of philosophers as he should be. He is there, but I think because of not getting tenure, which you've alluded to earlier, but basically I think it was Duke University that didn't give him tenure after he'd been an adjunct for a long time, or he hadn't even been tenure track. I'm not quite sure how this works, but there was that. And then there was the fact of not having a book in print for a long time. Of course, he's bigger than many philosophers. And today it's very much the case that you can be a philosopher being mostly recognized from video. And to me, it makes him stand out and actually makes him better than many people. But it remains that really we owe his memory and just the level of his work, the respect of having his book in print. So that's why we wanted to get this conversation going. So where are you with that? Is that book going to be in print some point, or what are you thinking?
Yeah. So we're there's actually more things going on. Now I think pretty much everyone in our family is somewhat, ignorant of sort of the, the language of power that, law is, right? Like, I don't like touching that shit, frankly, because I know I'll just get in trouble with it. So I don't know how much I can say, but I know there's a third thing that's also being worked on that I think y'all will really like, but I don't know what I can say about that either. But I know this: there's more movement on all of this than there ever has been in the past. There is a roadblock, but I don't want to get into that. But that roadblock is being dealt with. So I feel more hopeful about this than ever. I know for sure one of these things is definite, and it's just a matter of time. And it's unfortunately it's not the Habermas book, but my Max is in regular contact with them. He's working on that. And then the teaching company, there's a couple different vectors. We've got some people talking to people about that. I don't even think, and this is speculation or whatever, I don't even think they may have already relinquished the rights to that. So that's just a matter of trying to figure that out. This
basically these are the transcripts to all the lectures. Yeah. Which are actually online. They're actually on rickroderick.org.
Yeah, we even had a student on rickroderick.org. And that was another thing. That site appeared like soon after he died. Like, I think that site may be a lot of the reason. In Zero Books. I mean, let's be honest. Oh, I've got a quick funny story. So, Mark Fisher talks about in Capitalist Realism about call centers. And I worked in a call center for a while. And one of the guys I met there, and this is the economy we live in now, graduated from Brown. And we were talking one day, and he goes, he knew my last name was Roderick. And I was like, and he starts talking philosophy. Actually, he let me borrow the Mark Fisher book. This is all very strange. And I remember saying like, oh yeah, my dad, he's sort of like a well-known philosopher to an extent, Rick Roderick. And this dude just like we're in the same call center, mind you. Like, this is insane to me. He absolutely freaked out, told me about the Zero Books channel. And he's like, dude, your dad is like at the beginning of all these videos. And, I go home and I find that. So I think, rickroderick.org, Zero Books, all of this, and just the odds of running into someone that was familiar with all of this was just absolutely mind blowing, I think, to both of us. And the fact that we're caught in this sort of capitalist nightmare, sort of structure of a call center, at the same time was all pretty friggin' surreal. But as far as like how all these rights things are going, I feel very confident about every single one of them, depending on, how we can work out the rights. I think Texas also has some weird laws. I mean, we're all still in Texas, so there's some weird stuff around that as well. But we're working our way through it. I mean, to be totally honest, I think for a lot of us, it took a long time just to get over his death. I've read Max's essay, but it probably took me a year because I would start it and just absolutely break down. And I still can't tell you. I can't tell you if it's good, bad, indifferent, whatever, because I can't get through it in any sort of impassionate way in one sitting anyway. So
Well, yeah, I appreciate. I mean, it was difficult for me to read, and I have no personal connection. But I suppose we all have families, and we're living in this mortal existence. So, and that level, it was to some degree disturbing, but just incredibly well written and poetic, and put Roderick's work in context. But yeah, I appreciate what you're saying. I know it's a difficult, sensitive issue, dealing with the rights as well, I imagine, and then you have a whole family, then you have to navigate between you what should be happening. But I mean, where we left it is we basically just wanted to get it rolling. We didn't know, we didn't even get as far as thinking that actually someone must have the rights. It's not as simple as just telling a publisher, can you republish it? Of course, we should have thought that far ahead. But then, the fact that we got in contact with Max and you, has been great. We just like to kind of be, we're just going to follow and see what happens. So when you know something, but basically for the audience again, we were pushing Springer Link to republish Habermas and the Foundations of Critical Theory. Where they got to, because I emailed them, was that they would relinquish the rights if the family got in contact, and that's what they said off the back of our initial campaign. So I guess you're somewhere towards that.
Max is in contact with them. I can say that for sure. And again, we would have done all this stuff a lot earlier, but I think none of us wanted to even deal with any of this for such a long time. And there's this weird confluence now, right? But I'll say this, I'd love to come back on once stuff starts getting out, right? With just information on how to get to it and all that kind of stuff. I would have loved that.
There's a huge interest in it, which is something that, I'm sure it's a little bit of a pain because it's because of your loss, but I hope that it also helps with that a little bit, because I mean, since we published that petition, we get messages like 2 or 3 a month from people asking, "Hey, is there any word on that Roderick thing? Are you going to be able to get that book published? I would really love to read it. He's helped me out so much and really kickstarted my interest in philosophy." So it's nice that we'll be able to give them somewhat of an answer. And it's good for your family, I think, to know that there are still people discovering those videos and wanting more.
Yeah, it was true. But we got a few hundred people signing the petition, but that's nothing. That isn't a representation at all of how many people were interested. You know how people look at a petition for a while before they sign it, or think it's a good cause but don't sign it anyway, etc. And we're not PR people in petitions, so we don't really know what we're doing. But we know that the demand is huge. Aside from that, obviously, if you get it placed with one of the main publishers, then it's obviously going to be huge. So that will be a great thing. I haven't actually read it. I mean, we could probably pirate it, but it's not the point, because the point is we would like to see. The whole thing of books being bought and sold is kind of a shitty world. I'm an author. I'm with Zero Books, and I'd like to get my books sold, even though in an ideal world I just give away the PDF to everyone. But given that reality of that existence, I think Roderick deserves to have his books out there and selling and just in people's hands. So I can totally see that. When it is out, I'd like to do a reading group, because we do reading groups sometimes. So maybe we'd do that. Cool. When you know more about it, we can maybe get a PDF off the publisher and do a reading group as it's coming out or something. But we'll see.
Yeah, we'll definitely stay in contact. One thing I want to make really clear, just kind of on the back of that, is Rick would have loved this. He would have loved to have this stuff out there. I don't care if none of us see a dime. And I know that's the thing people say anyway, but I really mean it. I'm not seeing that money now anyway, and I'm fine. But I just want to make it really clear. It would just feel great to have stuff out. And I'm really excited about things that are going on, but I don't know. I don't want to fuck it up. Right. But I will definitely be in contact.
You can't say when a publisher is still deciding on finalizing a deal, you can't say, we're talking to this publisher. It just doesn't, I know it doesn't work like that myself. But yeah, we're hoping things we'll know soon, I guess, when
Yeah. But, there's a whole other thing. And I'm just only imagining it could be like a documentary or something, but then maybe not. Well, there's another book being worked on, and that's all I can say. And I don't even know, because I don't know. Maybe I can say, who the fuck knows? But I don't know. And I think
there
it's going to
was-
be exciting as hell. And I
Yeah,
cannot wait.
Max said it well. I mean, I can imagine it maybe this book thing sounds very exciting, and I can only imagine it could be some unreleased or notes or something, or I don't know. But another thing is that Max once said, or you, that somebody had started making a film, but you didn't quite like that. Maybe you can't say anything about this.
Oh no,
Someone
I'll
wanted to
talk
make
to
a
you
film,
about
but
that.
it didn't.
Do y'all want to talk
Yeah,
about
go on.
that? I mean,
Yeah,
what's
go
our
on.
time?
Yeah.
Is there a time constraint?
We got a few minutes. Yeah, I mean, we can go
we
into
can
that.
do that.
Because actually, the thing is, I mean, now it sounds exciting, the prospect of a film, but you're saying it didn't go well. You didn't like them snooping around or something.
Well, I mean, I think a lot of us were in a bad place, so we came off terrible. But aside from that, it's hard to put this into words, but there's this California sort of crystals, earthy, crunchy sensibility that's really obnoxious and very surface level. And I feel like that's where it was coming from. Without going into details about who was doing it and this and that. And they actually put a decent amount of work in it, but I just felt like, at least from my perspective, it didn't capture. It was more about the, oh, isn't that weird that there's a smart guy who has, who came from a small town or something. It's that sort of vibe, that bougie sort of Southern California vibe that's so obnoxious. And it was just like, he doesn't really, the people doing this don't really get it, And so we just, now of course we had signed some things off, so who the hell knows? Maybe we get stuck with it. But I just don't think, and plus our interviews just sucked, dude. Like we weren't savvy about any of that crap, and like, so who knows? So there's a lot of reasons I don't want that coming out, and I also just don't think it'll represent him at all. Whereas I feel like some of the things that we're talking about behind the scenes, coming from Max, from other people, are going to really represent Rick and really be done by people who really know him. And I just can't wait to bring it to y'all. Honestly, I think you're gonna love it. Be really excited for it. I'm super excited because Rick would have loved it. So yeah.
Okay, well that sounds
exciting.
Really good. I mean, we'll of course be happy to help you get it out in any way as podcasters and whatever video makers.
Yeah.
And poets, writers, painters, whatever. But we'll be happy to spread the word in whatever ways we can. But just one last thing there. I just had a question here. I'm sure you might have had time to think about it. Any last funny anecdote or parting words?
Oh, well, okay. So the anecdote thing's a problem because Rick really lived somewhat like a rock star. Now, he wasn't like big into drugs and alcohol and stuff when I knew him because of some I think he went too hard earlier in his life with it. And the problem, when you ask a thing like that, there's literally 1,000 examples of things. And so they all just crash in my head and then none of them survive the impact. Unfortunately, it's killing me because I can't get a fix on one single thing. But I think, the parting words are, I think for me, is to try to just spread this positive thing of yes, we all feel alienated from each other. We all feel, a sense of any kind of community or any kind of organization or any kind of, all that stuff seems to be eroding. But we do live in a time where ruling class narratives, aren't worth shit. People don't believe it. People aren't falling for it. There are positive things. There are things you can do. There are, anyone can start a fucking network, in their house or whatever. I want to think about the anecdote thing. Do y'all edit at all? There's so many.
Yeah, well, we do edit, yeah.
Oh, I'll give you an apocryphal one, okay? I don't know if this is true. He went to interview at Duke, right? Now, this is what I've heard. I don't even remember who told me this. Rick certainly never told me this. Before they came to a decision, he packed everything up, put us in this Chevy Suburban, this used Chevy Suburban, which was the biggest American car at the time, drove us out there, went to the department, and acted like he thought he got the job before they had given it. And he, from what I heard, he guilted them into it. I have 4 kids. I have a family. You guys said I got the gig. And so this is apocryphal, right? I don't have a source of truth about this, but it sounds, he loved to live on the edge like that. He was an amazing, quote unquote salesman. I want to believe it's true on a certain level. Like he was never supposed to get that platform ever.
That sounds great. Yeah, I may
Isn't that
have to try
amazing?
that.
If that's
Yeah.
true.
That is amazing. Maybe that's something he inherited from his con man father too.
Yeah, for sure. Actually, I want to make that point too, real quick, before we wrap this thing up. And we probably have gone long or whatever. This is one thing everyone needs to know, right? Being able to sort of connect with people, no matter what kind of awful bureaucratic administrator or whatever someone is, they're still human at their core. And I think one thing the left forgets is no matter how fucked up a system is, in your relationship with it, there is this other battlefield of human emotion, of sympathy, of shared experience that you can sort of work with on personal levels, on social levels, on media levels, where you can operate at a sort of different level, right? And you can make things happen that shouldn't otherwise happen or seem improbable, right? And Rick did that a lot, and it was certainly from his con man dad, and he would tell you that too. So yeah, no, it's just something I want to say. It's like there are different fields of battle. It doesn't always have to be, material. What are people getting paid? What are the benefits on all that stuff's very important, of course. And in America, I really wish, we all had healthcare and all that kind of shit. But just keep in mind, there are multiple battlefields. There are multiple ways to make things happen. So always be looking for those other angles. Yeah. So I don't know. I had a blast. Is there anything else y'all want to talk about or ask about? Or
No, that's great. I think that's brilliant. We'd love to have you back some point. You should probably have your own show as well, because you talk very well. So I'd encourage you get a podcast or something you want to do. Yeah, great. We'll have you back some point. Looking forward to more news. And we've been here with Marshall Roderick, the son of Rick Roderick. And that's all, folks. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Y'all have a great day. That was a blast. And I will be back for sure when things start coming out. And
if you have been enjoying our content, please consider registering your desire with the algorithm by liking and subscribing. This really does help us grow and reach a wider community. If you would like to support our work of documenting and nurturing the rise of post-capitalist desires, become a patron. This allows us to continue research-based memes, podcasts, and videos, as well as up our production value. Patrons receive early views of videos, exclusive content, and more, including physical art, and the ability to directly influence our research topics. The building of a better world happens on many fronts. Turn on, tune in, and shape a future collective reality.